Thank
Okay,
you.
so much, Peggy, for the introduction. It's lovely to be here with everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Before we move more into the session, what I would like to do is for us to just have a moment of grounding. So because it's broadcast, which is great, you don't have to worry about turning off your cameras. You may close your eyes, you may shift your gaze, but we're just going to take just a few minutes or less to bring our presence into the session. So now as we are doing this exercise, what I want you to do is pay attention at this moment to your breath. Is it constricted? Is it erratic? Is it paced? So as you regulate your breathing, in through your nose, out through your mouth, just notice any part of your body where you may have some tension or that you can feel it. Are your shoulders creeping up toward your ears? Do you have any tension in your shoulders and your lower back? You feel some muscle tension, butterflies in your stomach, whatever that is, whatever you notice about your body, just breathe through it. Now what I want you to do is take one deep breath in through your nose, hold it for 1 second, and let it out slowly through your mouth. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, you can turn your gaze back to the screen. So again, thank you so much, Peggy, for having me. It's been a great experience so far, and I'm looking forward to engaging with the Watermark community. So again, the thing that we want to do is look at session agreements. You can read faster than I can talk, so I will give you an opportunity to digest the agreements that I'm proposing. As you look at the agreements, think about what else will help you maximize this experience for yourself. You're welcome to put that in the chat if there are other things that you want to offer, pardon me, so that everyone can see. One of the things that's important is for you to feel like, oh, I am here and I am ready and I have a learner's mindset. That really makes a huge difference in terms of your engagement with anything, whether it's new material or old material. Okay. So now, tell me, what do these images invoke for you with respect to teams and team relationships? Now, Penny kind of let the cat out of the bag already from the first conversation that we had. So you're welcome to put your answers in the chat or just think about it for yourself about what these images invoke. Now, for me, the thing that is most notable is that this is a form of organized commitment. That's really what you are seeing or when people get married. And we can talk about the different ways that people get married, the different customs, but what's most important, it is an organized commitment. And that is really what, pardon me, happens with our teams. Now, the goal is for us to move from the group to a team. And think about this. Every group is an organism in and of itself. So it has its own dynamics. That organism is different from and more than the aggregation of its members. Like if you think of a marriage, a family, or even a sports team, each of those organisms has its own units or individual units, but then those units come together to make this collective organism. And so again, you'll hear me say this multiple times through our time together, is that you want to move from a group to a team. And what is a group? So a group is a gathering or a collection of individuals. They're relatively independent. They have various and differing goals sometimes. There may be some level of dysfunction. There's also some minimal alignment. In theory, they should be working together, but with the alignment issues, they may not. But that is a group. Again, hold that definition of that thought or those characteristics in mind as we go through the rest of the session. But the goal, again, is to move from those people that are at the concert with varying degrees of whatever to that well-oiled team. Now, two organization development experts, John Katzenbach and Douglas Smith, came up with a nice, simple, yet clear definition of what a team is. It's a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, a set of performance goals, and an approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. So even if you aren't a sports fan, generally what happens when we think of teams, we idealize that organism as a well-functioning team, especially if they're a championship team. So again, the goal is to move from a group to a team. Well, let's talk about some ways that we do that by looking at what are the core elements. So these are a few things that to keep in mind. These are factors as you are looking at designing or redesigning your relationship. So when we go back to that thought of organized commitment, these things should be present. The other things that you want to think about are communication, because there should always be that flow or that exchange between the members of a team. Pardon me. And courage is another. So the thing with courage, you have to be brave to sit across the table or next to someone, or even on Zoom at this point, to actually scope out or again structure what that relationship will look like. Because what if the person doesn't agree with you? What if they don't want to participate? So it takes a level of courage and bravery to do this. The other factor to keep in mind is it takes patience. It takes time to do this. The approaches that we'll talk about, they're simple, but they're not easy. So the thing of it is that you have to be patient with the process. The main thing is to embark on the process. The other thing to keep in mind that when you talk about these core factors in really designing or redesigning a relationship, this is a type of mindfulness. The thing about it is that mindfulness is moving with intention. It is also being present and not operating in default mode. So if you are purposely structuring a relationship or redesigning that, that is, again, a type of mindfulness. You can't be in default mode by doing that. The other thing that designing or redesigning a relationship gets you is psychological safety. Many of you may be familiar with a Google study that was done in 2013, and even McKinsey noted that study and published something in July of this year about psychological safety. Google learned that the most important characteristic or, pardon me, factor in an effective team is psychological safety. And McKinsey noted that as well. 89% of the employees that they polled, that was their primary concern. So psychological safety, pardon me, is that absence of interpersonal fear. It's people having a voice. So as you structure your relationships with each other, with your team, with a board, one-on-one with a direct report or a manager, you are building in psychological safety. So again, these elements that we see and the other three that I mentioned of communication, of courage, and patience really factor into mindfulness of designing these relationships and psychological safety. Now, what we'll do is we'll look at two group dynamics models, but there are some others that will be introduced, but I will not have time to actually review those in detail. And even I can't look at these models in detail, but we'll look at prominent features. So now this is Tuckman. Most people in the military and business are very familiar with this. But we'll look at some of those features again at each stage. Now Tuckman was a psychologist and he developed this model. Bruce Tuckman, pardon me, was a psychologist and he developed this model in 1965. So at the forming stage, what you are doing, people are coming together. Remember, we're moving from a group to a team. So there's just this collection of people coming together. It's the nascent stages of a relationship. This is a time to set boundaries, goals, and objectives, and have a clear purpose for whatever that team or unit is. Now, the thing with the goals and objectives, they are not just for the individual, they're also for the team or vice versa. It's not just the team coming together with these goals and objectives. The individual should have it. The next stage, which is the make or break stage, is the storming stage. This is major stress. So, and the reason you have stress is not the normal stress of like managing a project, managing your workload, or meeting deadlines. This is stress because it has a lot to do with the conflicts, and that's essentially what you're dealing with and managing at the storming stage. And let me say this before I talk more about what the storming stage is that if you don't manage this properly, or it's not necessarily you, but if this stage is not managed properly, what you will have are these faulty dynamics throughout the life of the team, whether it's a cross-functional team or a matrix team. This is what you will end up with, more or less, and having to deal with conflicts all along the tenure of the group. So this is something, a stage that is super critical, and also it's necessary to be managed. And again, here we go with that factor of courage. It's important to step up and address the conflicts. But now on this stage, again, the conflicts are mostly interpersonal. There's conflict because people have differing work styles. They have different personalities, of course. There may be some people that aren't happy with the leader or the manager. There are people that are maybe pushing against boundaries at this stage. Instead of renegotiating them, they may be passive aggressive about that, pushing against those boundaries. They may be aggressive. They may be talking things and saying a lot of negative things, but the idea is that the team is figuring out who it is, not just what the purpose of the team is, but who is the team and how are those members again. The team or the group is an organism in and of itself, not just the individual units within that organism. So the storming stage again is significant and it's important. And again, you're still at the group stage. Then there's the norming stage. So at this point, you theoretically have resolved those conflicts that I mentioned in the storming stage. So people maybe have reconciled their differences as well, work style, personality, approaches, whatever. This stage, team members or group members may also be appreciating the strengths that each has. So this is what's happening at the norming stage. And again, other things may be happening at each of these stages, but the idea is that these are the prominent features that happen. The next stage is the performing stage. You are at the team stage when this happens. So you are a well-oiled machine. The team functions relatively well. This stage is marked by knowledge and trust. You know each other. You may know the technical aspects of your work and the things that are expected of you as a team. And you can do the hard work and achieve the goals or objectives of the team without a lot of friction. The thing with this stage, and you are now this team, I think between norming and performing, the thing about this particular stage is what you are benefiting from is what you did in the forming stage. Putting together those processes, designing the relationship, or managing the relationships that you have. At this point, if the team is functioning well, leaders can comfortably delegate at this stage. Now, the last stage is adjourning. The thing with adjourning, you're celebrating and you're learning at this stage. So team members may leave the group, and that's a type of mourning. You may also be celebrating their accomplishments in the team. If it's a cross matrix or a functional team, the project or they have been completed, let's say a technology implementation. So you're celebrating as well as you are counting or breaking up as a team. The other thing, if there's an organizational restructure, the members of the current team and intact team may be distributed throughout the organization or people leave the organization. So at this stage, what you want to do is mark the change, whatever that change is. And then if possible, envision what's next. So if it's an intact team and people are moving out to different positions within or outside the company, consider like, okay, what did we learn? And what do we want to take to our next team? So that may be part of what you envision and even celebrate at this stage. One thing to know before we go into the next model is actually that this is not as linear as it seems, and the stages have no particular timeline. You could be at either of these stages for varying degrees of time. We're hoping that you're at the performance stage the longest, but you also may actually cycle back through the process if you have new team members or if team members leave. Any configuration in the group, you may have some changes where you're cycling back through the process. The next model that we'll look at is the group spiral. Now, the thing of it is, the image suggests a funnel and that you're always moving forward. That would be lovely, and that's generally the case. But think about a slinky. This is an old school reference, but that toy. So depending on where you are, how you are stretching it, and there may be a point if you stretch it so far, it sags at a particular point. The group spiral is similar to that. Like with Tuckman, you are not necessarily moving through these stages in this nice, beautiful upward fashion. You may be flexing in between. The depth of a particular phase has to do with what's happening in your team. So let's look at the different phases just a little bit. Okay, now there's the entry stage. That is where the team is determining what is its purpose and also who are the members and what's happening with those members or with membership. In the expectations phase, you are looking at pardon me, or designing what are the roles of the team, on the team, and who are the leaders. So leaders are not just people that are titled as leaders. It could be people that have significant influence within the team or outside of the team and in the company. So that is the type of leadership we are evaluating and taking stock of that. The third stage is establishment. So here you're doing goals, plans, metrics. An agency is also important at this stage. What is the group empowered to do, and what are the individuals in that group empowered to do? With effectiveness, you're looking at the patterns or the dynamics in the team, and what are the relationships. And at this stage, the experts like to talk about communion. The idea is that you know each other well enough, you at least have enough experience where it is more like a type of fellowship, when you feel connected. It doesn't mean you like everyone, but at least there's this level of connection. Now, with evolution, this is the transcendency phase, similar to a journey with Tuckman, where you're looking at, you are reflecting. And the team doesn't have to have broken up for this, but you are reflecting on whatever is important in the team. Like if you just finished in that technology implementation and you want to think about what are the lessons learned, or maybe it's not even anything significant or big, but you just see that there's certain types, dynamics or patterns in the team. So you want to reflect and see, okay, what adjustments do we make? What lessons can we learn from this? And you want to integrate those into the team. The last stage is exit, and that is considered dissolution. For matrix teams or cross-functional teams, this is a stage that will likely happen. The team has done whatever it wants to do or it was tasked to do, and then it moves on. Now, with an intact team, it doesn't necessarily mean that the group itself is dissolving. But again, you may have completed a big project, there may be a reorg, there may be any other number of structural changes. So there are aspects of the team that are dissolved at this point, but not necessarily the team itself. Okay, I'm going to show you a slide with 3 more models and some of the features of those models. This is just for you to know there are a number of models that are out there. The other thing to keep in mind with Tuckman, with the group spiral, and these and any others that you may know of or have encountered, is that these actually also converge with individual development, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's a SCARF model, if you're familiar with that, that has to do with domains and where we feel a sense of comfort or threat, going back to psychological safety. There's the Gestalt model or Gestalt approaches. So all of these converge along with organizational theories and how organizations develop. So you have like 3 significant things coming to bear when you are working in a team or moving from that group stage to the team stage. Okay, so now we'll look at a process that I propose and some approaches related to that process. So the thing of it is, this is like, what is the what? Why does the team exist? Why are they here? This is a very important part of the process, because when things get tough, people will have their reason for being to connect to. And I don't want to weary you with the marriage example, but that's part of it. When people have anniversaries or there are tough times or things that happen in any significant relationship, frankly, but marriage is because you make this public declaration at some point that you go back to that. What is the reason that we got together in the first place? So a team vision is very important. The other thing, how are you working together? What are the established or emerging or desired ways of working? Is it structured? Is it spontaneous? Is your team like order takers? Is it strategic? Is it tactical? Be clear about this. And if there's no formula or rhyme or reason, or I shouldn't say that, there isn't any particular approach that you have to take for this. It's just taking note and reflecting for yourselves and your team. How do we work? What system are we working in with respect to this team? The other thing is assess who's on your team. What skills do they have? What do they bring to the team? And if you're familiar with that old Christmas thing, I think it was A Year Without a Santa Claus. It was the Isle of Misfit Toys. All of these toys didn't work the way they were supposed to. And similarly, if there is someone that we think is a complete mess, they still have some skills and they bring something. Now, there could be, honestly, a misalignment between that person, the position they have, and what their skills are. But beyond that, they still have some skills. They bring something of value to the team. So it's important for the team member themselves and the team to understand what those skills are amongst all team members. The other thing is we all have things that are important to us. We often walk into positions or jobs or whatever. We have our own set of values. We have seen and we know that companies have values, but it's important when you are working with a group of people to understand what's important to those folks. These things may converge, they may diverge, they may be truly contradictory or at odds. Like, for example, you have a leader of a team who is very controlling, to be frank, or micromanager, or they want to be able to say and know what's happening with the team and the projects at any given time. But you have a team member who loves autonomy, who is good about getting results and executing, but they like the freedom in order to do certain things around their work. Now, think about those people, the leader who wants to control and have more access and information about the projects in their team, and then you have a team member who likes to be autonomous. Those are polar opposites. It doesn't mean that those two people can't work together, but for the sake of clarity, have the conversation, whether it's one-to-one or it's with the group, to understand what is important, what do those team members value. That's really a critical piece. The other thing, whatever you agree to, document it. Now, I'm going to tell you something that seems counterintuitive. It's important to document it, write it down somewhere, but don't put it on the wall. Because the one thing about putting it on the wall, it becomes part of the art. And people end up looking past it and looking through it. I worked at one place and the leadership was fraught with so many problems within themselves or amongst themselves. And then that trickled down to the rest of the organization and their respective departments. But what they did at one point with the help of a consultant was come up with these leadership tenets, these leadership agreements. Now, the folks at the organization ended up calling them the 10 Commandments. But the thing of it is they were posted at every conference room around all of the different locations that this organization had. And there were many, like maybe 20 different sites or locations. And what I found, at least as an organization development person working there, is that again, people just look past them and then they begin to weaponize those things. So the one thing about the agreements, document them, but don't post them. Part of where you get to them still living and being real is review the agreements regularly. You can do it at a team meeting. You can make it a ritual, like maybe every quarter the team goes out or on Zoom. You can have cocktails, whatever works for you, but develop some way, some points in time, again, a ritual of reviewing the agreements and assessing, are we really doing this? Do we need to throw out this agreement or do we need to add something? Whatever it is, just have a regular review. This is truly not a one and done process. It doesn't have to be tedious in the sense of having to continue to cycle through it, but just know that it takes some sense of revisiting this and reflection. Now let's look at a few approaches. Okay, so there are three that we have here. The first one, you can just have a list of open-ended questions that the team is reviewing and answering together. So some of the questions that you may want to ask: how do we get the best out of working together? How do we prefer to work? What assumptions do we have? What expectations do we have? How will we hold each other accountable? What style of communication will we use? How can we take responsibility for making team relationships work? What permissions do we want? Like, is swearing okay? Is not calling or being 10 minutes late to a meeting okay? That's just one example of the permission. How do we like to challenge each other? Or how will we challenge each other? What agreements do we need to put in place when things go wrong? How will we regroup when things go wrong? How do we give each other feedback? What do we need to do, or what do we need when we're under pressure? Will you ask for what you need? That's one of the last examples of the questions. But however the team answers this, and everyone on the team should contribute. And I heard it even earlier today about the types of thinkers, like crockpot thinkers. So if people need to be reflective or they need more time in terms of process and uptake, distribute the questions to the team ahead of time and then schedule a meeting and let people come with their answers. So again, if you have crockpot thinkers, Instapot thinkers, or frying pan thinkers, you have made space for everyone. So this is just one of the approaches, and it actually works very well. This is the session agreements, even though I proposed something or offered something, this is something that facilitators and coaches use often to construct relationships with a room, even though, again, we are in a community, but it's temporary, but still, what are some ways that we want to work together? The second approach is needs and offer. Now, this is actually a conflict mediation approach. But the one thing about it, it works very well if you're establishing a relationship with someone or with a team, or if you are addressing important matters before there is a conflict. Now, what happens is that each person determines what are the needs that they have, what are the most important needs. It's helpful to do this part in advance because people may say they have 20 needs, but really what you want to do is have people come up with their top 3. If they have time to think about this, then again, they'll have to sort through for themselves. What is it that I really need to be effective at my work? Okay, and if you have a small team, maybe you can allow people 5. But then the team comes together to discuss what these needs are. After each team member has provided what their needs are, then the team and each team member talks about what they can offer in response to those needs. And from there, you develop the agreements, the working agreements of the team. Now, the last approach is start, stop, continue. You may have also heard this as plus, minus, equal. So the thing of it is that this is a reflective thing for teams, again, that have already exist. It's a great frame for them. It's a reflective exercise as well as there's an active part. So one of the things from, I guess, a very tactical perspective is you want to set up an electronic document. You can use Jamboard, you can use a Word document or some other shared document, a Google Doc, and have each page can be labeled stop, start, continue. You can use a dry erase board and pardon me, and you can actually have these things. In any case, you somehow need some way to have these buckets or categorizations. So as a team, you're reflecting on, okay, what do we want to start? What are some new things or some ways that will help us be effective? That all goes, and each team member is contributing, whether you do it spontaneously, but I prefer or suggest that you actually do it as a reflection. Let the team members go away with their ideas of what start, stop, continue are. And whenever you decide to meet, you're coming and each team member is offering that. So in any case, what are the things that the team wants to start doing? What is something that they want to add? Okay, what do they want to stop doing? What helps them be least effective or productive or helps the relationships flow or hampers the relationships? So those you want to stop. Continue, what things work really well and what do we want to keep? So that is a process, or again, these are approaches that you can use. I've gone through them quickly and they're simple, but again, they're not easy. The one thing I encourage is just start the process and complete it. I worked with one team where we started this process and it was not easy. And our team was small, there were 3 of us, but our team or the department was new in the organization. So we started the process, but then we never completed it. Literally a year later, we still hadn't finished the process. So that you can use your imagination as to some of the things that happened with us with respect to the team. The one thing about it too, with the process that I outlined in the previous slide, and even these approaches, again, do them and finish them. Even if you decide, okay, this doesn't work for us, make the statement, communicate, and say this doesn't work. And whatever ground rules you set, whichever approach you use, communicate that to people like, oh, you'll only be able to answer 3 questions, or you will only be allowed to bring 3 needs. Or in terms of the start, stop, continue, whatever it is, if you have any limitations, any boundaries, just communicate that with each of the team members ahead of time. Now, the last thing that we'll look at are the considerations. So the organizational culture that you work in. What organism do you work in? Are there silos within silos in your organization? And even within the team, does the team itself or the leader of the team encourage competition amongst the team members? Does the organization encourage that? Are there some structural limitations where it may be difficult, you feel like, to do some of these things? So that's something to consider. The other thing is, oh my gosh, if you have someone that's on a team who has been treated poorly, or they have HR issues, let's say they're on a PIP, or they have some negative history with the previous manager or previous team members, but now they're on your team. How do you deal with that wounded team members? Or again, just something, a relationship that wasn't set out well at the beginning. So the history of the team itself and maybe the departments or whatever is important to consider. Now, this thing here with respect to resistance, when you are designing or redesigning a relationship with a group from group to a team, the thing that happens is that there's an accountability piece. We looked at that factor earlier. There are some people who don't want to be held accountable, and these processes really lend themselves to that. So you will get some resistance from the members who don't want to be held accountable if they come and go as they please, or they consistently miss deadlines, but no one seems to challenge them on that. But then this process may, again, engender a level of having to answer or respond when a deadline is missed repeatedly. So you will have that sort of resistance. Again, if there's competition amongst the team members, that can create a level of resistance and barriers for the team. Now, the other part is connectivity. If you have a manager who has no interest in communicating, or the team doesn't, and especially now we're in a virtual environment where people may not be used to communicating with each other, that will cause some challenges. If you have team members who don't feel a part of the group or the team, or people just aren't interested, or they're fearful, that will create some issues. That's another consideration. The last thing that is also important, and it cuts across to some degree many of these considerations, is there are some team members who may not be aware of how they show up. So that's an emotional intelligence or an EQ issue, where that's something that, pardon me, they may have a low score if you are taking an EQ assessment on how they engage with others, or their awareness of themselves. There may be team members who have trouble managing themselves. There may be team members who are not used to being accountable in terms of managing relationships. They may just want to be able to sit in a small space or some space and do their work independently. But those are things that still need to be addressed. There may be some team members who feel like they don't have the ability to meet the team agreement. No matter what the issue is, and these are just a few that I thought of. There may be others that you think of. You want to address these issues. It doesn't mean that you don't structure, design, or redesign your relationships, again, moving from a group to a team or a current team. It just means you might have to do a little bit more lead work to scale or reduce those barriers or get rid of them altogether. You may have to do a lot of one-to-one work with the team member, for instance, that feels very wounded or sensitive, or they've been traumatized in some sort of way. But it doesn't mean that that member can't participate, and that the team, again, should be able to walk in lockstep with each other. The thing that I would also encourage with respect to addressing these considerations is really focus on the what and the why before you get to the how. Often, especially as cerebral, brainy, technical people, if it's just anyone in the corporate space or any organizational space, you want to get to how something needs to be done. Oh, we've got this problem, here's a solution. Often we really need to spend time with what is actually happening. What is the issue? What is the concern? And why do we have that? Once you are clear about the what and the why, then you can move to the how. Okay, so now we are at the end of the session, at least for my talking portion. I want you to take a minute to reflect on the session. Yes, I was talking quickly. There was a lot of information, but whatever the baseline thing that you're able to take away, I just want you to reflect on it. And then I want you to answer the 3 questions here. So I'm going to stop talking now, pardon me, while you take your time to reflect on these questions, and Peggy will probably come back in.
Hello, Hope. This is so useful and interesting to listen to. And I am reflecting myself. I think we can stop sharing your screen. Um, there we go. And I'm reflecting myself on some of the work that I have done or not done with teams and thinking back to the times when I've been most successful. And as we were talking about earlier, it's like you're thinking, what's an example? Do you have any examples from your own management careers, like the things, the times that you've been successful or not? It's like having those written agreements, whether they are just a vision statement where when I have gone into a new job, for example, and presented here's what I think success is going to look like, has been so incredibly helpful. Then people can ask you questions and they can challenge you and they can say, that's a good idea, but how about something else? And it really helped people come together as a cohesive team toward a particular goal. So it's great to see that sort of validated. I also wanted to share one other thing. Somebody once said, and this was about marriage, because sticking with your marriage metaphor, they said commitment is the emergency generator of a relationship. And I just love that, because there are so many times when we are in change and crisis, and that commitment to one another is really what keeps us going when everything seems to be falling apart around you. So I just wanted to share that. And I know people, as they're reflecting, they may need to have a list, have those questions again. Do you want to just repeat those questions that people are reflecting on?
Okay, I can repeat them, and what I also do, or Avery, if you can put them in the chat as well, that might be helpful. So I'll read them again. So does your team have a formal or informal working agreement or working agreements? That's question one. How would a relationship design or redesign process help with your team's effectiveness? The third one is really most important. What is one relationship design action you will implement in the next 48 hours? So even if you didn't agree or understand everything that we talked about, there's got to be one thing that resonated with you. And I would like for you to figure out, what is the one thing that I can do with my team now? Again, as Peggy alluded to earlier, we are remote, everyone's everywhere. And having this cohesiveness in a team, that emergency generator of commitment, is actually really helpful. So what is one thing that you will do in the next 48 hours? Thank you, Avery, for posting that in the chat. Peggy, I saw it pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, and I hope that people will feel brave enough to say one of the things that they might put into practice in the next 48 hours. For me, I think it is that sense of figuring out what we want to start, stop, and continue is so helpful at a time when we're managing a great deal of change, because you have to experiment a lot, right? You have to experiment, and it's like, we're all new at this. We're changing certainly at Watermark, we're changing so many things at once. We used to be a live events company and we're not doing that anymore. So what do we want to continue that is valuable from the past? What new things do we want to try? And what things did we try and say, well, great, but no cigar. So that's certainly something for me. And I hope other people will put some of their commitments in the chat so that we can. Oh, here we go. Here's somebody saying, thinking of the needs offer and ask, what are my team members' top 3 needs that they need to have to be effective at work?
Thank
which
you.
is a which is a really great one. Again, it's just a very concrete step. So I hope, while we're waiting for other people to add some things, are there other examples of team agreements that you think are especially important at a time when we're all working remotely and our teams are oftentimes you're not seeing the people who are perhaps at the top of the hierarchy in your organization, which you might have been doing before. So we're relating to each other in very different ways. Are there some things that you're seeing that are especially effective? And if I could ask you one more thing, if you could move a little bit closer to your mic, your sound quality is better the closer you are to us. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
I'm sorry if people couldn't hear me well before. Okay, so one of the things that I think is helpful, and you and I may have talked about this when we first met, is really doing a listening session. So maybe what a team can, I have seen these be very helpful in the virtual space. Just giving people an opportunity to come together to talk, not to solve problems. Is like date night. Again, sorry for the people that we are wearing out with this analogy of a romantic relationship. But the idea is that you're just coming. Let's say once a month, the team is going to have a 30-minute listening session. And everyone agrees, everyone shows up. And part of what they're doing is just talking about how they feel about work. It's not about, or even about anything, because you are bringing yourself to work. Even if it's a measure of yourself and you don't feel like you're bringing your whole self, you want to be able to just have someone hear you. So making space for team members to be heard is huge. So having a regular listening session is one of the practices or the agreements that is super useful.
That's wonderful. That's one I'm committing to my team to do that regularly. Um, someone here, a couple of people who are sharing in the chat. Um, someone saying we have informal working agreements, but not written formally. A redesign would benefit our team because at a time when we're feeling disconnected, I think that's a theme of 2020. And one relationship design action be to document our agreements to ensure we all have an understanding of our purpose, goals, and systems of working. Someone else brings up setting clear expectations. I heard a great phrase the other day where it said, clarity is kindness.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and someone else saying that actually gradually building trust and creating genuine listening sessions is important. So definitely endorsing that idea.
Mhm. And one of the things for the team member where the kindness is clarity, or that phrase, I have been amazed at how I have worked as a consultant and even as a permanent employee, whatever that means, is that where you are working and no one, you were given a job description, or you applied for a job, and that's, nobody talks about your job necessarily until it's time for review. But what I found to be interesting, there are three jobs. There's the one you apply for, the one that people expect you are doing, and the one that you're actually doing. So with respect to the kindness and clarity connection, I have heard so many times, well, this person's a senior director, they should know. Do they? Should they? How should they know? So part of it in an agreement is being clear and being precise around things that you expect. It is really difficult and unfair, frankly, to hold someone to an expectation that has never been voiced. Even if you believe that a person should know, say it again. Right. And maybe that's an agreement that a team will make. We will say it again. Because part of that is like, well, Peg, you're a CEO. This is what CEOs do, but you're a CEO at Watermark. That's different from the last place you were a CEO. I'm a consultant. Yes, and that's not all of what I do. But if someone is used to dealing with a consultant in a particular way or space, and then here I come, I am the new person engaging with them, they have all of these expectations and we haven't talked about it. So as a consultant, this is actually a process that I have to use, because it's not just the project itself. How are we doing? How are we going to communicate? What things, when you are not satisfied, or if I have some trouble with you as a client, how will we do that? So
Yeah. It's having been a consultant and been hired to do a job that I thought I was doing. I know exactly what you mean. And it is that statement of work that we tend to do as consultants is actually really helpful in the corporate world too, right? It's like we need to have a statement of work for ourselves when we enter into a new role. We have to make those expectations really clear for ourselves and for those that we work with. And it's hard. It's hard when you come to it as I feel like I've been around for a long time. I should know everything. And the fact is I do not. And things are changing all the time. And you have to ask for advice, you have to ask for help. And you have to make and you have to ask those kinds of probing questions so that you can get the answers that you need to move forward.
yes, and if you think about, again, I mentioned organisms because the idea is that an individual is an organism, a group, an organization is an organism. It's living, it's breathing. It is changing all the time. And even if you've been around a long time, like we have, there are things that you still there are different people you're dealing with, different situations, and those organisms, again, those two individuals or multiple people are changing all the time. There's even new learning, even new technical learning. So that shifts the landscape a little bit. So that is the part that we want to never take anything for granted. Clarity is kindness. And when you mentioned the statement of work as consultants, I have seen in the tech sector, even within a company, there were service level agreements. So people may call them that. You have those with your customers or clients, but you can have something similar. There are operating agreements that are very common in manufacturing or other spaces. So you can think of that as well. Whatever you want to term this, if you've noticed, I've stayed away from the idea of rules. So rules of engagement, I'm not a fan of that term. It's actually a term of war, honestly. And we have a lot of that sort of language in our culture, particularly in the corporate culture. But just think about agreements, because the idea there's agency in that. People are coming together and they're discussing it. It's not a rule, because oftentimes rules are generated by one person and they're superimposed on another group of people. So think about that, the service levels agreements that you've seen, and look at that. Even if you feel like, okay, well, what Hope gave us was, I want more. Okay, go and look at some service level agreements. There are all sorts of templates out there. There are even relationship agreements or some of these things, because facilitators use this often. So you'll also find something like that. There are brave spaces. That's very simple. That's another one. Maybe that's a rule or an agreement that we're going to have the courage to say what we need to say to each other. Again, clarity is kindness. Yes. So thank you for all that. Yes.
Joy Selden is asking a question here. So, and she's saying, I don't lead a team, but I coach people who are part of a team and greatly frustrated by the lack of clarity and communication. How would a team member, and this is so important because our whole leadership month, we're thinking about leadership not as something that happens up here and happens to you, but
Yes.
happens as something that you bring to wherever
Yes.
you work. So how
Mhm.
would a team member approach managing up to get leaders to provide more clarity? Such a
That
great
is,
question.
it is. I appreciate it as well. So thank you, Joy. So what I would suggest is that with you as the coach, making sure that that person feels empowered. Like, what are the barriers for them going to the leader of the team and say, hey, I went to this workshop, or I heard something, or my coach suggested something. That way you can take a little heat from yourself and say, what might be really useful for us? Are you open to doing team agreements? Or us just doing something like looking at how we flow or the effectiveness of where we are? Have the person ask a direct question. If they want to build some introductory speech for themselves so they can feel empowered in the moment, but definitely schedule a time specific just to make this request, and don't make the request by email. So I mean, I've had to do this as a team member when I was a junior team member, and even working with new bosses. So part of that is I had a list of questions. How do you like for me to disagree with you? How do you want this? How do you want that? And then I also, it's similar to the needs offer, in the sense that I'm asking them questions. And some of them were like, what? I don't know. I've never had to think about this. Just go do your work, sort of thing. Now, I am a little stubborn, so I wouldn't leave until I would come again. So we got those answers. The other part of it is you want people to feel empowered. So as an empowered person, I also have to talk to them about ways that worked for me in terms of the working relationship, or this is what I need in order to do my work. And sometimes that did not go well, but you have to have the courage for that individual contributor to go to their manager and ask for it and see. All you can do is see. And then for you, this is the last part of the answer, is that even if your team does not want to do this as a process or have these agreements for themselves, what you as an individual can do is assess where you are from based on what you perceive or know or your experience, and make agreements with yourself for engaging with those people. It doesn't work well if it's one person, but someone will notice that you are consistent, and they're going to ask you, oh, well, I noticed that you do this all the time, or you ask this question, and then we'll also open up the possibility of doing more. Last thing, yes, I'm sorry, that was not true. This is the last thing, is get some people on your side. Once you talk to your boss, or even if you just put some feelers out with other people, hey, do you think it would be useful for us to kind of have some team agreements and see what other people in the team, so there's strength in numbers, to go back to the warriors for those of us in Northern California.
Mhm.
Yes.
That's great. I want to ask a question about, we've all been on teams where some people are really on the bus and some people are really not on the bus. And, and, especially at a time like now when we realize we're all so much under a lot of stress and we want to maintain the relationships that we have with people, but we also want to move toward that, we can't get, we have an expectation of ourselves not to be less efficient, even though the stresses and strains of the pandemic are making it nearly impossible to hold ourselves to that standard. So can you talk a little bit about those, how do we shift those agreements at times of great stress, and how do we make that clear? And at where do we put our, this is my boundary beyond which, that's just that's resistance that we have to deal with. And you know what I mean? I'm kind of an incoherent question, but I think I'm sparked by the time that we are in and all of the things we're trying to negotiate at once.
Right. And no, it wasn't incoherent at all. So this is the thing, you can't over communicate, period. Part of what I found is that we're always on camera or always on the phone or always some engaging with people, but we're not communicating fully. Sometimes we're half in that conversation, we're thinking about something else, or we do feel the pressure of working 14 hours a day because our worlds have collided, right? Or we normally would meet someone in the kitchen while they're getting coffee and we address things. So part of what I would say is that you can't over communicate, but part of what you want to do is make sure your communication with each other, even with yourself, and setting a boundary is very pointed and clear. Like, are you asking for something that you really need long term? Is it a short term thing? Whatever it is, communicate that with your direct reports, with your peers, or with your supervisor. So that part about on the bus, off the bus sort of thing. And even if you say part of the communication is even if you don't say, which I suggest you inform people, but you have an automated response to your email. I'm done at 5. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be that careful, obviously. But I think the communication, the two-way piece, but also what are you deciding within yourself? And how do you communicate those decisions independently? Yes, we are all virtual, and looking at people on screens is wearing a lot of people out. I heard about Zoom fatigue in week 2 or 3. I'm like, now we are in month 7, right? But one of those things is, again, is being very deliberate, intentional about your communication, and don't feel as if you can over communicate. I've heard about these other things that people are now using more opportunities to reach out because there's not that kitchen talk. The other thing I would recommend is make some time for coffee chats. Do it online or just do it on the phone. Say, we're not doing screens, or, but I'll just call you just to see how you're doing. And if there's someone that you would regularly run into, they're not on your team, but you want to share something with them or communicate with them, call them, email them, say, hey, do you have time for a few minutes? The idea, the central part of the answer is communicating. Whatever decisions have been made, whatever you do not want to do, have some exchange with someone about that. That's part of the communication. And then what decisions can you and another person or a team member or boss agree to, and then move from there.
Wonderful. That's really great. We've got another question that came in the Q&A from Eve Gross, and she's asked, can you speak to the idea of the frozen middle management resistant to change, and how to push them toward improving how they manage, especially considering the current racial justice movement and focus on diversity and inclusion work? That's a big question for us all, right?
Yes, it is. And thank you, Eve, for asking it. So one of the things about the frozen middle, think about the values question. So there are a couple of things. So the courage piece is big. Do you have the courage to initiate the conversation? I have a friend who works at Google, and she told me that when one of the latest incidents had happened, and they had a team meeting, and they're like, okay, who's doing what? And she had the courage to say, well, I'm feeling really sad. I'm distracted because I think it was the thing in Kenosha with Jacob Blake. He had gotten shot in the back. He was like, I just don't understand this. And everybody just moved on. And so she was feeling really down about that. So, because her manager is one of those frozen middles, as Eve identified them. What I encouraged her to do was go back to her manager. I think maybe what he did was write her an email. She said it didn't seem very authentic, but she appreciated him reaching out. I would say that you understand the values of that frozen middle, maybe because they came into the business world at a time when you don't talk about these things, but you can understand what they value, not assigning anything to it. I heard a D&I expert say on Monday, Don't call people out, invite them in, call them in. So the thing of it is, if you understand what's important to that middle group, and it's not going to be a monolith, right? If you understand what their values are around anything, just in general, let's say that safety, again, psychological safety or physical safety is important to them. As you harvest that understanding, then what you can do is actually shift things and move and engage with them in a way that you can get to their social and racial justice piece. Because you're like, oh, this is important to you. This is what I see as important to us as people in general, or for this group of marginalized people. I think you can just start to break it open. But that frozen middle, I'll tell you, Eve, it does take some time, as you probably know. But I do think understanding what's important to them and hearing them, because this is the other part. People don't feel heard even in that frozen middle. They may have a level of authority within an organization, but they don't feel heard either. They feel put upon, they feel various things too. So sometimes, even as a direct report or someone who is considered subordinate in some way or having a lower position, making time to listen to them, you would be surprised how much traction you can make by just hearing them.
I heard in one of the panels that we did at the beginning of Leadership Month, we heard from someone who said, we have to learn to value imperfect conversations. And a lot of what you're talking about today is, yes, we're trying to get to that clarity of communication, but it's not always going to be perfection of communication, right?
And be willing to take the imperfect action. So I appreciate you saying that. It's not, but the thing of it is, if you can get to what the common ground is with people, because all of us have something that we value and that we're interested in. Again, it may be divergent in some ways, but if we can get to that, sometimes you can chip away at the person who is not willing to have the conversation. And the reason I mentioned about when people enter the workforce, so I've been doing listening sessions for clients since June, different clients. And part of what the older folks said, over 50, well, we didn't talk about this stuff at work. I'm not used to this. You don't talk about it. And I'm like, okay. And I heard them. And all my job was to facilitate that conversation. And so the idea, though, is that there are people who value, let's say, privacy or confidentiality or comfort. People value comfort, which many people do. They're not willing to have these conversations. But there are ways, if they say they value comfort, oh, well, what makes you comfortable? It's doing a little digging. We have to ask some different questions, I think, now to get people to a place where they can come, right, to have that imperfect conversation, or we take an imperfect action. It's not simple, so please, I think it's simple, but not easy. So that's with all of this. It's simple, but not easy. So thank you, Eve. I know that if there's another question, a follow-up question you have, please let me know.
It is just on 1:00, and I want to respect people's time and your time, Hope, for donating your time to us today. I really, really appreciate it. This has been such a stimulating, interesting conversation. We will transcribe some of the things that you've said so that we can send out some, top 5 advice from Hope Jones. We invite everybody on the call today. If you have not signed up for any of our other leadership programs this month, please go to wearewatermark.org and look for our Leadership Month programming. We have, I think, 3 more. Another session on Teams on Friday with Joan Ryan, who has just written a book about the intangibles of team chemistry based on her sports writing career. And we have 2 more panels next week, one with some financial powerhouses and another great panel called Racism is Emotions. That will be a very interesting conversation, I'm sure. So I invite you all to join us. Thank you so much for being here. And mostly thank you, Hope. It was so great to have you, and I can't wait to have you back.
Thank you, Peggy. And thank you, everyone, for your time and your energy. I really appreciate it. It was great. Thank you, Peggy. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.